In the 2025 to 2026 winter, a lot of colonies experienced poor outcomes in overwintered shed storage. Now, some of this was due to abnormally warm temperatures in the upper Midwest, where some sheds could not keep colonies cool. We all know that colonies experience temperature stress, especially when confined, will winter poorly. Independent of this, something else was going on. Some beekeepers placed oxalic acid strips into colonies or did not remove strips before placing them into sheds. Those operations experienced colony loss or numerous dwindling colonies. Other operations used strips outdoors and had mixed results, with some having poor results and some excellent results. Now, as a community, we've had a lot of conversations about this, but without much specificity or details about the mechanisms. My name is Dr. Zach Lamas. I am the scientific advisor for Hive Armor Biosciences. I put together a 20-minute presentation on the research I did to provide details to these conversations, especially the mechanism in which oxalic acid reacts in sheds to kill bees. So let's get started. First off, we should go back a little bit and acknowledge that the EPA does not allow use of oxalic acid in winter sheds. This is in a 2021 PREA amendment document. And if you dig through the document, which is no one here would be doing that, but if we go down into directions for use, they're pretty explicit, where it says in bold and caps, do not use in enclosed overwintering areas. There's no explanation or citation in the document for this direction, and it's stated twice. Now, when I'm interviewing beekeepers, I'm trying to link together variables that are really important. And I think what we should do first is acknowledge, well, what's in these strips and what might be interacting with them. So there's three components to slow release strips: a substrate, which is often usually a fiberboard. There is oxalic acid, which is your active ingredient to kill the mites. And then there's glycerin. And glycerin is this amazing, it's used to stabilize and to bind the oxalic acid into the substrate. And what happens is you get this strip that slowly releases small amounts of oxalic acid to your bees. Well, I called up a chemist friend and was like, hey, we've got this problem, and I just want to toss it out to you. I said, if you had these three ingredients and you added water to them, because moisture was the thing that other beekeepers were bringing up, what would happen? And he was like, oh, well, glycerin's a humectant. It loves water, has a huge affinity for water. If you were to add water, it's going to absorb the water and push the oxalic acid out. And I was like, okay, thank you very much. You essentially gave me the answer that I needed. So what I did was I set up three different experiments, and the first one was testing this. If we went from a humid environment to a moist environment, would we see a loss of life of bees when those conditions change? So I'm going to tell you what I did, and I'm going to tell you why I did it. So the first thing is, let's acknowledge your colonies, they're a humid environment. If you were to shrink yourself down to the size of bees and jump inside, you would be inside an environment that was approximately 93 degrees, very humid, and you would see the bees around you regulating the amount of CO2 inside the colony, but it's not a moist environment. Moist environments are where water vapor is actually condensing and forming on solid surfaces. So they're excellent at maintaining a humid environment to keep their brood going and to keep themselves from dehydrating or to losing too much water, but they're not in a moist environment. In our science labs, we often do research in petri dishes or in these plastic cups, and these plastic cups we call cage trials. Now, some beekeepers don't like cage trials because they're so far removed from colony settings, and I agree. They are useful, though, for studying things quickly and with a high degree of control over all the variables, because we're doing it in the lab. And we have these cages that we can modify for our use. So what I did was I placed bees inside of cups or cages where water vapor would either completely ventilate or would condense. And then I observed the bee mortality over the course of 24 hours. So a little bit of background. We have these semi-ventilated cages. These are cages where we perforate the side, so when the bees respire through their trachea, the water vapor will leave. It'll stay a humid environment, but not a moist environment. We also have these fully ventilated cages that we use, where we have a completely mesh screen top. Again, same thing, the bees can respire, the vapor leaves. And we normally put about 30 bees into these cages. And I was like, hey, this is a really good opportunity. If I put 100 bees into these cages, one of them would create a moist environment, while the other, the fully ventilated, would stay a humid environment. I can, in miniature, test this interaction with an oxalic strip. And that's exactly what I did. I set up replicates. In my trial, I had 24 cages altogether, divided among several different groups. And I cut up strips so that approximately 1 gram of oxalic acid, the active ingredient we use as a miticide, was inside of each of these cages. I also had some what we call negative controls, where they were semi-ventilated, ventilated, and they had a cardboard strip with no impregnated glycerin or oxalic acid in them. And they just served as a background to make sure that humidity itself wasn't going to be moisture itself wasn't going to be an issue with these bees. These are what the cages look like in the fully ventilated cages, where we have approximately 100 bees in there. I added comb to make it a little bit more colony-like and pinned the strip to them. These are what the semi-ventilated cages look like after a few hours, where the mass of bees in there are going to respire, but there isn't nearly as much ventilation as the other cups, so we get some condensation that forms. So let me show you the first group over 24 hours by pictures. These are bees with oxalic acid strips in a fully ventilated cage. This is time 0, so when I first set them up, we can see that the bees are underneath, on top of, away from, walking around the comb, just being bees. 12 hours later, same thing, the bees are on the strip, under the strip, away from the strip, on the comb, they're walking around. 18 hours later, I think we have 1 bee death up here in the top left. Otherwise, everyone's walking around doing their thing. This is time 0 for the semi-ventilated with the oxalic strip. And this is 12 hours later. We can start to see that bees are forming masses on the bottom. That's because they perished. And this is 18 hours later. In my semi-ventilated with the oxalic strip, moisture has built up. And we see in some cages we had complete loss of bees already. And in some we still have bees that are clinging to the comb. You can't see it here, but a video will come up in the next couple slides. They're not really moving anymore. So in the other ones where we have the strip and they're ventilated, our bees are still quote unquote being bees, where these are kind of just clustered and looking greasy. By the way, I did set up a control for this where it's a semi-ventilated cage with just a piece of cardboard, no impregnated glycerin or oxalic acid. The bees are, what they're probably doing actually is using these holes and venting it a little bit better themselves. But we see when they're confined without the strip, moisture builds up a little bit, but that doesn't cause loss of life in and of itself. So just for some good background for everyone watching in case you want to ask. This is my survivorship curve for the pictures I just presented. I have 2 groups here that I'm showing just to keep it simplified. I have my fully ventilated cages in orange, my semi-ventilated cages in the aqua blue. And these bees all had a strip with 1 gram of oxalic acid in them. My y-axis going up and down is my survivorship probability. My x-axis is length of time in hours. If I had a perfectly straight line, then that would mean no bees died. Every time a line goes down a little, like right here, it's a bee that died. If a line goes down a lot, then a bunch of bees died. And what we see is a statistically significant difference between survivorship when moisture builds up inside of an environment with oxalic acid versus one that doesn't. These are videos of the pictures I just showed. And we can see over here on the right, again, our bees are remaining pretty active. They're trying to get out because these are mixed bees. So representing nurse bees and foragers, etc., that we put in a plastic cup. I'll play these again. And we can see over here on the left where moisture has built up and we have those strips, that the bees are actively falling and dying on the bottom of the cages, and the rest of them seem immobilized and a little bit greasy. For experiment 2, we actually had something that happened here in Maryland that was serendipitous for me, which is we had a few days of cold, rainy weather. And some of you might already be thinking, can I use this in the rain? And I had just made up a bunch of mini nukes. We produced quite a few queens here. And it was 51 degrees Fahrenheit and raining all day. And I cut up some strips to put them into my mating nukes, where one half of the divider would not have a strip and the other half would. And I went out and viewed them multiple times the first day. So time 0, first hour, second hour, fourth hour before going to bed. I think that was around 10 hours later. And then at 24 hours and 120 hours. And some of you might be expecting, oh, we can't use these strips in the rain. And you can see from the pictures here, we don't see any visual difference between these bees. When I pulled them out, there were no dead bees in the bottom of these mini nukes either. So this is the thing we want to point out. Your bees are incredible at maintaining constant hive conditions, even though the outside of the colony might change dramatically. We might have extended rain or very warm temperatures. They do their best to maintain constant temperature for their brood and their bees. That's a different conversation if bees are confined. And if you're moving bees on the back of the truck or putting them in shed storage, that's a great example of bees being confined. Or if bees are compromised in some manner and significantly compromised. Now, that last comment we need to vet and do continued research on, but we know that bees that are heavily impacted by mites and viruses, or if you get a very old, right-skewed population from chronic brood diseases, your bees might not be able to regulate the inside of the colony as well. So we want continued research there. But otherwise, this is a great example where your colonies with these strips going through the summer, even though the outside temperatures and rain may occur, your colonies are going to maintain constant temperatures. We do not see that interaction with the strip. And this is something to reiterate again, is that humidity does not equal moisture. So humidity is the concentration of water vapor in the air. Many of us keep bees in humid environments. Our colonies themselves will have a humid environment. They'll often regulate that. Now, moisture is the buildup of small amounts of water on surfaces, and this happens as air condenses. And so we recreated this in the laboratory by adding too many bees to a semi-ventilated cup, and we can see that moisture buildup. It's still a humid environment, but now it's also moist. And that moist interaction is what's poor with these strips. Again, it allows the glycerin to absorb the water and push out more oxalic acid than would be standard. Now, I forgot to mention this earlier. The amount of oxalic acid it takes to kill a bee is approximately 165 micrograms per bee. That's actually really high for an active ingredient, and that's the LD50, the amount it takes to kill 50% of your sample. So when these strips are functioning inside a human colony environment, they're releasing very small amounts. Your bees are not getting an acute toxic dose. And that's how the strips are supposed to work, and that's why they're so stable when we use them spring through early fall. It's a very different conversation when those strips, and depending on whether you make them or you purchased them in, they'll have 8 to 12 grams of oxalic acid in them. If all of that oxalic acid were to be released, as in the case where we're seeing this interaction here, then you are delivering a lethal dose to your bees. To show this case in point, at the end of the trial, and this was going into day 2, I had surplus cages, and I said, well, let's try to recreate this, not by creating a moist environment, but if I were to add water to the strip. And this might be emblematic of, let's say you left strips or significant remnants in your colony. And I used to keep bees in upstate New York. If we didn't have an insulated inner cover, then water vapor would freeze against that inner cover. And when we got a January thaw, it would thaw and just water would come down and drench your bees, right? So there's a good example of how that might occur. I had cages that were fully ventilated where I did not add water to the strips. And then I had strips that I would add 2 milliliters of water to. As you can see, I'm pipetting with a soft tip pipette right here. And we can look at what the visual response is of these bees to no water added. So they're walking around, they're being bees. We're recreating these moisture symptoms by adding water to the strip over on the right. So here is just another really great example where we're using stronger evidence to show this interaction. So there's going to be a few questions. Should I overwinter with strips or strip remnants? The answer is no. Strips retain oxalic acid in them, even if they're a remnant, so they should be removed in the late fall prior to shed storage. This can be difficult if you're not on a schedule, and what we really encourage is everyone setting up their last strip application in the late summer, early fall, and already scheduling with the crews when they'll be removed prior to winterization. This can be pretty easy to do when you are doing your last check back for requeening or queen loss or feeding or protein supplementation. So that can be something blended in with other management. Can I use this slow oxalic acid slow release in the late fall as an emergency treatment? And my first response, and this is what I give to everyone, and if you're on here and I've worked with you, you've heard this before. When mites are in high numbers and viruses have impacted a colony health, you're going to have some level of poor outcome no matter what you do. Whether you're using Amitraz or Formic or Naroa or this product, no matter what you do, you're going to have some level of poor result simply because colonies have already been impacted. And some colonies, like this is my colony, one of my colonies here, it was walking dead. At the end of the day, approximately 90% of that brood was either dead or had a mite on it, right? So some of your colonies are going to be reflective of something like this. You're going to have a poor result no matter what. But the short answer specifically with this question is no. It's not a great emergency treatment, especially late in the fall. Your bee population is critically lacking. So an example here with my colony is it's already lost through attrition a lot of the adult bee population that should be there, and the bees that are inside are compromised. So those bees are likely, because they're not dense, they're going to isolate from that strip. So it makes it a non-ideal treatment at that time. You can reach out to me for other management plans if you find yourself in this spot. Now, I will point out, though, in the next slide, why slow release is an excellent treatment option when you have this going on around you. And that's part of what is a best management plan. Not only do we want to treat the mites in the colonies that we have, we also want to protect them from reinvasion from crashing colonies like the one I just showed you. And that's exactly what I'm doing in my apiaries. So this is us the other day. It's in the morning. This is a small site. We have, I think, 14 colonies in it. We made 30 nukes out of it. And the parent colonies, they get condensed down, so I can still pull one medium honey super from them, and I'll pull a couple splits with a late summer flow later on. I'm leaving strips in the brood chamber. And our goal here is we want to put a heavy downward pressure on mites' ability to reproduce so that these colonies are not impacted by viruses when I'm entering that fall period. Additionally, these long-term treatments, and we have several on the market, two of which can be used during honey flows, so that includes Naroa and oxalic acid slow release. They're providing you longer-term protection, not just a flash treatment. So a flash treatment being most amitraz use or formic acid, where you put it in, and then once the active ingredient's gone in a short period of time, your colony is vulnerable to reinvasion. Now, when I have colonies that perish inside my operation, they can send thousands and thousands of mites to my nearby pallets. So for example, that previous picture I just showed you, that colony is capable of sending thousands of mites right within my own yard. If I follow a best management plan that uses strips like this from spring through the early fall, I'm reducing the number of crashes I'm going to have in my own operation. So I'm reducing the number of times thousands of mites are going to be moving around. And our goal is to reduce that down to zero when we get onto these annual plans. I'm also now protecting myself from crashes in the neighborhood. In highly concentrated areas like up in North Dakota, this is a predominant problem for a lot of great beekeepers. You're doing everything right. You're getting your mites under control in the spring. You're trying to run real strong colonies so you can make money during a honey flow, and you're getting dinged with these reinvasions from neighbors. This is a good response to that. And the last thing that I should say before going on, because I don't want it missed, the big goal here is having colonies that I'm winterizing that aren't impacted by mites and viruses. Without viruses, we can sustain higher levels of mites and you won't see the negative impacts. We've allowed a viral epidemic to run its course. And unfortunately, with the viruses that can get into our bees and the mouthparts of mites, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to recover heavily impacted colonies without having dwindled colonies or a lot of shrinkage in the operation. So our goal is always to start this early so that by the time we enter the fall, we're not dealing with those problems. This is a recap. And I want to comment here. The Phil the Bee Man video, if you haven't seen it, I'll put it in the comment links. It's an excellent video. I think Phil did a phenomenal job there. He brought attention to it. He laid it out very clearly, a black and white response with strips in sheds and not in sheds. And I think it's what we needed as a good conversation early in the season. It's the beginning of June now. And now we're describing as the company the mechanism of why that occurs so that we can all plan on avoiding it and why. Not just avoiding it, because we've heard enough stories, people are going to, but why? And to me, that's the most empowering thing is when we get information like that. And Phil described oxalic acid as a blunt tool. Now we're doing work so it becomes a refined tool so that we can use it as a strategic annual mite management and integrate it. So we want to begin in the spring and use into early fall. The slow release strips, they actively suppress mites so they can't build up. That's going to equate to you having more colonies that are not impacted by viruses, especially when you're starting to put heavy investments into them into the late fall. We've seen some people integrate this with other active ingredients with a lot of success. We're excited about that. Please reach out to me if you want additional information on that. Plan your last application and then already schedule removing the strips and remnants before wintering. So if you're going to do your last application mid-August, beginning of September, then you already have the date with your crew where they're going to go through as you're doing winterization and removing the remnants. This is not intended as an emergency treatment in the late fall. And these last two comments, the last one's a reminder for myself, the conversation I want to have now. We have 8 weeks of really good beekeeping season left ahead of us. It's the beginning of June. 1 month later into the middle of July, next month later in the middle of August. We begin to rapidly lose our runway that's ahead of us for really good beekeeping season. And by the time we're into mid-August and honey's getting pulled, we only have so much time for our colonies to continue producing good bees until they have to be producing winter bees and you're locking them up for the winter. It's both an incredibly long amount of time and an incredibly short amount of time. Not to be pessimistic, but we don't have that much runway left. If you've been working with me, you know this is a conversation that we've had, and we're making management plans for that. We're not relying upon these emergency fall treatments. It is looking like a dry summer right now, and hoping for our industry to pull good honey crops. We need it. Being realistic, that does mean the next big payout for most operations is going to be almonds in 2027. So for me, and the continued work that I'm going to be doing is lining up operations so that they're geared up and heading into almonds with incredible bees for a good payout. The last comment is, what does winter mean? This is where we need to do continued research, because wintering in Florida, wintering in Southern California is different than sheds and different than wintering in upstate New York or something. And we want to fine tune knowing where interactions will occur and where they won't, and what condition of colonies are important, so that again we can continue refining the use of this. Here's my contact information. I'm the scientific advisor at Hive Armor Bioscience. We're very happy to put this work together. Anyone here that's been working with us knows that we create partnerships, and we're happy to do that going forward. If you have questions about the interactions or want something with specificity, or if you want us to communicate this with your crews, we also have Spanish language versions of this that'll be coming out. Hope everyone has a great day and have a good one.